Sanbanani, good evening, Dumalanga, and welcome to episode 175 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Kumalo. It's a Tuesday edition of the Private Property Podcast, and if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. We certainly have missed out on quite a lot that we have on offer. Do make sure that you go back to some of the great episodes that we've brought on your screens from March until today. And talking of all the other episodes that we have, of course, beyond the Private Property Podcast, we also have brought you the First Time Home Buyers Show that you can look forward to tomorrow evening at 7:45. And that's where Estee class, and she's going to be speaking tomorrow to Zerlinda. And they're going to be looking at 5 steps to achieving home ownership through property stockfile. So if you want to get a better sense of how you can get a property via property stockfile, you know Zerlinda is no stranger to the private property. We've had her on right here on the Private Property Podcast. So if you're first-time home buyer, perhaps don't really want to buy something for yourself, want to get in with a few friends and family members and get that property via stockfile, do make sure that you tune into the First Time Home Buyers Show tomorrow evening at 7:45. And we also bring you the farming podcast for all of you at home who've got green fingers and are looking at something in agriculture. The farming podcast, brought to you by Umbali Noko, comes to your screens every Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 p.m. And that's one that you certainly want to look forward to. If I remember earlier today, they were looking at the use of various technologies in your farming operations. So that certainly is a show that you can look forward to for all your agricultural needs. And over the weekend, we also don't leave you alone. Chad brings you the Developers Show, where we profile some of the best estates that the country has on offer. So do make sure that you tune into the Developers Show every Saturday and Sunday at 1 p.m. Well, we certainly do have a lot on offer here on private property, and we do hope that your home ownership, home living needs are being catered for. And if they aren't, drop us a message. Let us know what we're missing. Perhaps there's a blind spot that we can't quite see. So do let us know what you want us to cover when it comes to your home needs or home ownership journey that we'll be sure to look at. And talking about something that we love doing, we certainly love having conversations across our social media platforms. And a great competition that we're currently running right here on the Private Property Podcast is Questions for the Champions. That comes to your screen every single day when you tune into the Private Property Podcast, of course, at 7 o'clock. And all we're asking is that you form a team of 5 with your friends and family, and you're going to be a team of 5. Give yourselves a unique name and make sure that you join on the live at 7 p.m. Make yourselves know, give us a greeting, hashtag, your team name. We saw yesterday different teams making themselves known. And then be sure to tune in, or rather wait until the end of the show, because at the end of the show, we're then going to ask 5 questions. And if you get all 5 questions correct, then your team will walk away with 1,500 rands. That's, of course, the first team to answer all 5 correctly. And we announced that the winners the following day on our Facebook page. So do make sure that you've gone over to Facebook, tune in live, of course, with your 4 friends and family members, and stand a chance of winning that money. Next week, we'll be giving away 15,000 rand to the first team that's going to walk away with that are going to get 10 questions correct. And of course, then the second team, the runner-up, they're going to be walking away with 10,000 rands. So you want to make sure that you participate as much as possible, get your friends and family to participate, and that's how you'll get to walk away with some money. Now we're looking at something that we love talking about, which is community schemes. We love talking about community schemes because so many of us are moving into community scheme living, and so better understanding the various implications and how we almost also need to just psychologically adapt to living in a community scheme becomes so important. So this is one of those issues that we're always going to talk about, because a lot of us are either renting in a community scheme or you're buying into a community scheme, and we're slowly getting up to grips with what it actually means to live in a community scheme and what it essentially entails. And we're looking at understanding the latest changes to the Sectional Titles Act. And my guest this evening is Zerlinda, who's the co-founder and director at TVDM Consultants. Zerlinda, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi there, Zama. Thank you so much for having me on the show again.
It's always so great to have you, Zerlinda. I think you're one of the authorities on community schemes, so it's always great to chat to you about this particular topic. Now, I actually saw the article that noted how the Agricultural Land Reform, and Rural Development Minister, Uthokothithisa, had introduced the Sectional Titles Bill to Parliament. And you're almost citing, I think it's a 20-page document citing the various changes and different considerations. And that's essentially what we're going to be having a conversation about, better understanding what the potential new legislation is going to look like, what's currently proposed in, in the 20-page document, and that is different from the current legislation as we know it. I know that right now it offers, certain protections to, tenant, the new bill that is going to offer sort of additional protections to tenants and even owners of people who live in a sectional title. So I think, Zerlinda, perhaps let's go through what is probably one of the big key things before we kind of go through some of the other key features that have been noted in the bill. What's probably one of the biggest ones that when you look at it, you're like, this is actually almost a game changer of sort, or is the one that is one to particularly note?
Sure. So before we get into that, I actually want to make use of the opportunity as well to chat about the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act and the amendments that we would like to see in that piece of legislation. I think there was a lot of confusion in a lot of different groups, both WhatsApp groups and social media groups, and there was a lot of confusion when the Sectional Titles Act or the amendment bill came in, and people were very excited about there possibly being amendments to the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act, which there isn't. We know that the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act deals with the management issues, and then the Sectional Titles Act, as it's amended, deals with a lot of the conveyancing issues, the things that the developers and the conveyances of the developers deal with before a body corporate is established. So although a lot of them are not going to be really of interest to those people that are living in community schemes currently, they most certainly are very relevant to those people that are buying into a new community scheme, a new development. And I think the most important is something that you touched on, and that is that consumer protection element that comes through the amendments to the Sectional Titles Act. Things that people have to become a lot more aware about in regard to the developers' rights, and then of course members' rights when they move in, making the legislation a little bit more user-friendly, and I think probably bringing it into line with the style in which the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act was written. And that's probably the biggest thing that stands out to me, is that knowledge element that is given to members before they buy into a sectional title scheme and before the scheme is established.
And perhaps then let's go through firstly then, Zerlinda, I mean, you said that certainly as practitioners in the field, you would have liked there to be an amendment to the Sectional Titles Management Act. What would have been some of the key changes that would have liked to come up?
Sure. So, two parts is some of the really big things that the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act introduced. For example, at a general meeting, an annual general meeting or a special general meeting, there's no longer a show of hands. You have to vote on a voting card. So that whole element of being anonymous has fallen away. The quorum requirements have changed. The proxy limitation has changed and has caused quite a bit of an upheaval in practice. And a lot of the practitioners that I speak to, managing agents, trustees, they would like, when the amendments do happen, for the requirement of a 2 proxy limit to actually fall away. And the reason for it is not to encourage proxy canvassing or proxy farming, but rather to encourage attendance and reaching a quorum. Because unfortunately, a lot of body corporates relied on proxies being obtained to actually meet their quorum requirements. And meetings are having to be adjourned a lot more often. And we see it especially this time of year as well, where a meeting actually needs to be called afresh because a week later, we're sitting at Christmas time or New Year's time or whatever it might be. So it makes it very difficult practically to manage and to administer a scheme. Some of the other things that people would like a little bit more certainty on is perhaps when the Community Scheme Ombuds Service reviews and approves rules, which was never the case before the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act. They would like certainty as to what types of rules the Community Scheme Ombuds Service will accept and not. At the moment, and I find it very often in my own practice, that I learn as I go, and I'll hear from other schemes, I'll hear from the schemes whose rules I lodge, or directly as part of dispute resolution proceedings, what rules the Community Scheme Ombuds Service is finding desirable or not. Every now and then they publish a list as well, but it feels as though it's a bit of a moving goalpost. So if that could incorporated into the legislation, that would most certainly make it a lot more user-friendly, especially for schemes where the trustees or the managing agent are wanting to amend the rules themselves and not having to outsource it to attorneys, for example, or consultants. But unfortunately, they're having to because they don't know for certain what they actually need to do. Something else that has, always been a problem, and we were hoping with the introduction of a modern piece of legislation, was the requirement of sending a notice for meetings where a special unanimous resolution is going to be proposed or tabled, having to send it out via prepaid registered mail or hand delivered. It seems very archaic that you're having to send notices out, and in all likelihood, like 80–90% of those notices are not going to be collected and are going to be sent back to the managing agent's office. And even though all those papers get printed and the prepaid registered mail postage gets paid, at a meeting, very rarely do owners actually come with their pack, with it even looked at or the seal even cracked. I mean, I've been to meetings before where the owners walk in sometimes with the envelope not even open, so they haven't even taken the pack out of the envelope. So for me, it's a very archaic system, and I would like to say to body corporates, you don't have to do it, but unfortunately the Act says that you do, and there's no way around it. So that's a nice amendment that I would like to see. There's also a little bit of I suppose unhappiness is perhaps the most suitable word, where people can make themselves available to be trustees, but they're in arrears with their levies or in breach of the rules. And that was something that was introduced to the Sectional Titles Act before it was repealed partially, to actually say that if you are in arrears with your levies or if you are in breach of the rules of the body corporate, you can't stand or you can't be nominated as a trustee, which in my opinion is the right thing. I find it very unfair that somebody that is in arrears can make a decision as to somebody else getting handed over for arrear levies. So these are the types of things that I believe, and I've heard in the industry, should be changed. There's a couple of others that we can perhaps touch on, but a lot of them flow from changes that were made either from the Sectional Titles Act to the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act, alternatively were made in the Sectional Titles Act and were just carried through into the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act. So I think we got very excited when you saw the amendments. It was just the amendments in certain people's opinion to the wrong piece of legislation.
Zerlinda, you mentioned something, and I got a bit curious. You mentioned how in many ways the Ombudsman there are certain rules that they find desirable and others not. So perhaps, share the ones that they typically don't quite like or would not, approve of. What kind of rules would those typically be?
So, when I consult with trustees after I've drafted their rules, and I always say I must consult with you because I need to explain these rules to you. And trustees very often say, oh, I don't need this, or I need this, or this isn't important, because perhaps they haven't dealt with the situation and they perhaps don't think what would happen if they have to deal with that situation, not have that rule in place. But something that I mentioned right from the beginning of the consultation, before anybody even says hello, is, there are going to be certain rules that you don't agree with that have to be in the rules in order for the Community Scheme Ombuds Service to accept it. And one of the biggest is slaughtering. So many body corporate rules say no slaughtering of animals in the scheme. Sections, exclusive use areas, common property, you name it, not going to happen. And the Community Scheme Ombuds Service does not allow that prohibition. They say, fine, we can prohibit slaughtering on common property, but you cannot prohibit slaughtering within an exclusive use area or section. You can regulate it, and sometimes you can regulate it, pardon the pun, to death, but unfortunately, that's what the Community Scheme Ombuds Service requires. And many schemes don't even contemplate the need to have a rule like that in place, but you have to be cognizant of your constitutional rights, essentially, at the end of the day. And that's another very important element, is that the wording, the rules that you're going to implement need not only comply with the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act, but it also has to comply with the Constitution, your human rights, the Bill of Rights, your right to privacy, and your religious practices and all that fun stuff. So it has to be allowed. Something else that makes me think of the religious practices is the smoking of marijuana. So a lot of the trustees are saying, well, if we ban smoking, we're going to ban the smoking of legalized marijuana as well. We can't do that. So when you're dealing with smoking within your section or within your exclusive use area, you're allowed to do it. But yes, the body corporate can say you're not allowed to go down to the common property swimming pool and light up a joint. You have to do it in your apartment. So the whole concept of nuisance and disturbance comes into place, the smell, etc., etc. So the marijuana one's another big one. Something that's a bit recent that I've recently learned of is the right of the body corporate to tow away a vehicle that is parked illegally. And many body corporates don't want to enforce fines and they don't want to enforce clamping. So towing away, or rather the threat of towing away, was probably the most effective way to ensure that one of the three big P's of sectional title parking was actually adhered to, or the regulations were adhered to. And now that you're not allowed to tow away a vehicle, that becomes very difficult. The pet rule is also something that very often comes into play, and a lot of body corporates again believe that they are not pet friendly. And although arguably there isn't such thing as a pet friendly or non-pet friendly building, when it comes to dogs, guide dogs or assistance dogs, they have to be allowed. The body corporate can't say we don't allow dogs, therefore your dog isn't allowed. So that's another thing that one has to consider. Something else that comes up more so in homeowners associations than body corporates is the whole issue of access control. So if you have a contractor or employee, they have to jump through 10 hoops before they can enter the estate, or they need to walk around with a bib, or they need to walk around with an identity card or some type of identifying material. The community scheme ombud service is not allowing that, and that has actually been in court as well as something that cannot be enforced. Access, blocking people's access or prohibiting access when they're in arrears with their account, discontinuing their services, cutting services. These are all things that cannot be allowed in the rules. And without going through the process of submitting rules for review at the CSOS, people don't know this. And like I mentioned, it's a list that is ever growing. And although I think it's possibly not possible, it would be great to have a list that says yes or no, and for certainty that is the case. But it is most certainly something we're working towards.
Yeah, because I think, at the end of the day, you can only have so many rules, right? And as much as different kinds of rules increasingly come up because of the different ways that we're kind of living, you're not going to have them to infinity. So it certainly does help to get a sense of which ones are almost a standard yes, then you as the trustees or the members of that community scheme, you want to have these sets of rules and you pick and choose the ones that you want, and then which ones you shouldn't even touch because it's not going to be allowed, so don't even bother. So that's something that's certainly important. Zerlinda, we're going to go for a quick break. We're going to come back. I then want us to just get a better understanding of this, the new titles, the sectional titles bill, just so viewers at home can get a better sense of it. You did say earlier that it does affect mostly developers, and there is better protection that's given to whether it's the tenants or certainly even owners of people who live in that particular community. There's quite a big chunk of it that is around privacy as well. So we're going to go for a quick break. We do want to hear from you. We talk about sectional titles all the time, and we've spent quite a little bit talking about rules. And I think I've still heard, Zerlinda, unfortunately, of instances where people who live in community schemes or even HOAs have said that the other residents in the same community scheme have said that they can't slaughter. And that becomes a very contentious one because, as you're saying, we've got different religious, cultural beliefs, and in some people slaughter for whatever reason. And so it's interesting that that still becomes a thorny issue, in 2020, where you would think at the very least would be up to date with, our constitutional rights and responsibilities. So it's interesting that there's still those rules that are you actually do find community schemes that are being built very recently and would have that as one of the rules where they'll say that you're not allowed to slaughter. And it becomes a big contentious thing because when one family that lives there, or more than one family, has an event that necessitates them to slaughter, it does become quite a big issue. I want to hear from you at home if you do live in that kind of community scheme or where that rule has come up. How did you raise it? with with the trustees or with the managing agent? Was it ultimately resolved? Because as we're finding out, it's not something that's actually legal. And so I'm certainly interested in how the wording perhaps is. Perhaps they might want to know upfront in time, so that security also obviously lets the the truck or whatever that's bringing whichever animal is being slaughtered in. So an awareness must be made, as opposed to kind of doing it in secret. So that's certainly something that would be interesting to hear. We're going to go for a quick break, and during that we'll be hearing from Estee.
Good evening, Private Property fam. We all know why I'm here. I'm here to announce tonight's estate winner. We all know 2020 has been a rough year, but I'm sure there are some highlights, and we'd like to know from you, what are your highlights and how you remained on top of your game? Tonight's winner is Pumla Kema. Pumla says, "Hi everyone. It has been a really tough year for us. We absolutely had no control and still don't with the second wave hitting us. Closing our offices due to COVID really messes up, affecting my finances in a bad way this December. On the upside though, the interest rate has drastically dropped and is a win situation for us. It has kept me busy with a couple of deals in the pipeline. I am in East London, sick in bed with flu today, so I am grateful and have high hopes for 2021. I sold a property to a client in Johannesburg via email, sales packs, and videos. So let's stay positive and hope that things will get better for us in the future. Pumla, get well soon, but you have won yourself 1,500 Rand cash. And to all the other estate agents out there, you can too. So please send through those messages. We'd love to hear from you, and you could be our lucky winner tomorrow night. Stay tuned."
Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Khumalo. And this evening, we're looking at understanding the latest changes to the Sectional Titles Act. I'm joined by Zerlinda, who's a co-founder and director at TVDM Consultants. Now, Zerlinda, I do want us to then look at the changes, and I think we've done such a great job highlighting some of the changes that various practitioners in the field would like to see in the other associated acts. So when we then look at this particular one that's been tabled, what are some of the key changes that the minister has effectively put forward?
So you mentioned right at the beginning that the document is about 20 pages long, and interestingly, I'm going to go double check now, other than the cover page, there's about 9 pages of amendments. And the nice thing about reading an amendment bill is that they actually underline the amendment, so you can see exactly what it is. And there's only about 9 pages of that. And then at the end, there's quite a nice commentary on the actual amendments and the reasons for it and the references to sections. So I think it's very reader friendly and consumer friendly to have a look at that. And like I mentioned, especially for people that are buying into new developments, either those that have previously bought into sectional title or those that are new into sectional title, but particularly new into a new development straight from the developer. And, I very often speak to people and read agreements of sales and read rules of brand new developments and listen to what people are asking questions on. And these are some of the things that they don't really think about asking a question to, but they can most certainly be affected. And some of the amendments, and again, you mentioned it earlier, was that process where if you are leasing in a building that is going to become sectionalized, what are your rights? And a lot of people don't know this, and they need to be represented. And an issue of representation was it was never previously catered for. And the amendment bill actually speaks about agents being allowed to attend the original or the initial proceedings with the developer in order to actually give advice to the potential new members or purchasers into the sectional title scheme when they're given the first option to do so. So that's one of the first amendments that was incorporated. Something else was a clarification as to the interpretation of an exclusive use area. Now, an exclusive use area, we know in a sectional title scheme, is a part of the common property, and it remains common property in its nature, but it is allocated specifically or exclusively for one particular section. And we always denote that to the section owner and not necessarily an occupier or like a tenant of a section. And the amendment actually speaks about it being an area that is used and enjoyed by both owners and occupiers. So that's an amendment now that has come in. The clarification that an occupier also has a right to an exclusive use area that is allocated to a section. Then another thing that is also vitally important for people buying into a sectional title scheme, either a new development, which is more often the case, or an older one, is to ascertain whether or not there is a developer's reserved real right to extend the scheme. So in other words, that the developer can come in a certain period of time, be it 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, and actually build on to the scheme. And many people are not aware of this. They don't know where to look for it. They don't know whether or not the right has been exercised. And if the right is exercised, how is it going to be exercised? And the amendment has brought in two changes. The first is that the developer's reserved right, when it lapses, that has to be noted. So the person no longer has to go and have a look at how long that development right was for and then count, how many years have passed, whether or not it's lapsed. But it actually is noted in the title deed that it has been lapsed either by an application of the developer or the body corporate. I can imagine the body corporate will do it more often. And then the other issue is how that development is actually going to be extended. So in other words, physically, what is going to be done? Is it going to have 10 extra flats, 100 extra flats? Is it going to have parking bays or garages? Is it going to be horizontal or vertical? How many floors up? All of that information needs to be set out right at the beginning of the development by the developer. And very often these documents go missing. And unfortunately, when you look at the deeds office and sometimes the sectional scheme files, it's quite an archaic system of hard copy files where things most certainly can go missing, either intentionally or not. The amendment allows for new plans to be submitted to replace those that have been lost or are missing from the file. So in other words, anybody buying into a scheme is always able to see exactly what the developer intends doing with this reserved right, or whether or not he has exercised it correctly in accordance with those plans. Something else is the developer's ability to extend the scheme by the addition of common property, extend sections, consolidate or subdivide sections before the establishment of the body corporate. And if after the establishment of the body corporate, that those that have now become members of the body corporate are aware of it. So very often developers, are accused of doing all sorts of things. And now the amendment is actually, it clarifies what the developer's rights are in regard to a body corporate, a newly developed body corporate. So that's quite a nice clarification. And then it also deals with the developer's rights to cancel exclusive use areas, which I think is, quite an important one, because very often, not only with a developer, but an owner of a section as well, a member of the body corporate, when they sell and for whatever reason, the exclusive use area, when it's a registered exclusive use area, is not through the section, that exclusive use area vests bonds into the body corporate's name. And the body corporate obviously can't hold an exclusive use area because it's a portion of common property. It has to allocate that. And one of the things that the amendment has introduced is that the developer is allowed to cancel an exclusive use area, and that provision is provided for. So that will clarify issues like that. And then the exclusive use areas that have been created under previous sectional title legislation in terms of the rules can more clearly be delineated on sectional plans and ceded over to owners to give that legal certainty that they were lacking when rules change or rules are not carried forward into the new legislation. So those are a couple of the amendments. Like I said in the beginning, a lot of them are very much aimed towards new development, developers, conveyancers, but working in sectional title, living in sectional title, investing in sectional title especially, because we find a lot of people investing in new developments that are going up all over the show so quickly. It's very important to know of these amendments, but I'm still very excited to see when the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act is going to be amended, but we'll wait with bated breath to deal with that.
And you know, I actually like that you ended off on that note, because we are right now seeing a rise of quite a lot of sectional title communities. I mean, if I just look at the Gauteng area and just the bullish building that we see, I think sometimes in certain instances, I think, look, we're building more than we have, you know, demand for some of the types of complexes that are being built, but we're certainly seeing them, you know, everywhere. And I think oftentimes a lot of new buyers are either buying, you know, their first home and they're buying to either live there. Some are looking at it being an investment property. And often they weren't living in a community scheme, and where they were tenants and perhaps weren't as in tune with what's happening behind the scenes. So having a better understanding of, you know, interacting with the developer, especially when you're buying certain, you know, apartments off plan, and really what the process is, because we hear one too many horror stories around even just the sheer process of buying off plan, as much as many people also have a really good experience. So knowing that there are, you know, various, that the law is certainly adapting to also consider the fact that we're actually seeing a rise in sectional communities, and we know that they're not going anywhere. So if anything, you need to better regulate for them, because, you know, as you were speaking, even as because I had to read it a bit earlier, you do get a sense that, look, the reality is some of us are living in community schemes where the developer no longer has a relationship with, you know, with the structure. They are long gone, and it's not that the development or the apartments or complex or estate is that old. So sometimes it could be 5 or 7 years, and there's just no relationship. They built, they got their margins, they've moved on. And whereas a lot of the developers, though, that we're finding now, they're not building to move on, right? They're building, and part of them are going to have a certain stake. They leave a certain amount of the land. They have, you know, other sister companies that then do the management and that runs the community scheme in various ways. So we know that they're becoming a value chain, essentially, that developer is creating a value chain for that community. So knowing that there are legislative considerations for even the changing nature of how developers are conducting their business is actually so important for viewers at home, and especially those of us who live in community schemes or have ambitions of living in community schemes, because that's certainly something that I think we sometimes feel as though you don't know what you don't know. And even if you knew a little bit, you sometimes just don't think that the law's on your side, because developers have very big pockets. You think, look, they probably, there isn't a legal provision for something like this. If there was, then why would they, you know, do something like this? So I think it's always so great to know that certain things like that are covered and are speaking to kind of the new normal, as it were, that we are all increasingly finding ourselves living in. And, you know, Zerlinda, I am going to leave it there, but before I let you go, any final tips for viewers at home right now who are living in community schemes? We know that COVID has affected us in different ways, but it's also particularly affected many of us who are, of course, living in community schemes in various ways. Any tips for us, especially this festive season, before we wrap up and, you know, come back in the new year?
So you mentioned just before the break about you'd be interested to hear about, you know, a rule in regard to slaughtering and what type of provisions and regulations you can have in that type of rule. So during the break, I just went to go pull up one of the rules that my partner and I recently prepared. And, you know, first and foremost, you spoke about notice to the body corporate. So, you know, we speak about needing to have obtained the prior written consent of the trustees, which consent can't be unreasonably withheld, that there needs to be a date and a time for the slaughtering to take place, the type of animal to be slaughtered, the name and qualifications of the person who's going to be carrying out the slaughtering, that it is going to be in accordance with terms and conditions of the trustees' approval, that there's going to be written confirmation from the municipality that it adheres to the bylaws, written confirmation from the Department of Health. There needs to be written confirmation from the SPCA. There needs to be, you know, any type of proof that the affected owners have been received notification of it. And then, of course, you know, the carcass and things like that needs to be removed from the property, you know, not thrown in the refuse room or whatever it might be. So there's so many stringent conditions, and that is something that I often say in regard to short-term letting or anything, keeping of a pet as well, is don't ban the behavior, rather regulate it. But when you regulate it, do so reasonably. And if you are battling to understand which regulation should there be, or whether or not you're being reasonable because it's your home and your investment as well as trustees, is to outsource that to somebody, you know, approach a specialist to help you in the preparation of those rules. And leading into the discussion of COVID and our new normal, you know, there's been so many interesting topics that have never really, you know, touched the forefront of our interest in rules that are now becoming more and more important. You know, you were mentioning the kids playing in your scheme and there's no space for them to play, and, you know, people being at home the whole time, using resources, having to wait for the elevator, not having a parking easily. These are all things that are arising a lot more in communities because a lot more of us are there. A lot more of us are living in an apartment, you know, maybe going to move back with mum and dad or whatever it might be. And, you know, we have to be cognizant of that, but more importantly, our rules need to cater for that. So it's a really good time to amend your rules, not just for the sake of it, but to really cater for the reality of your residents in the scheme.
Well, Zerlinda, we are going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and thank you for joining us this year. We've certainly had a lot of great conversations with you when it comes to community schemes, and we do look forward to chatting to you in the new year, hoping you, your family, as well as your business partners have a great crossover, and we'll see you in the new year.
Fantastic. Thank you so much again for the opportunity, and to all the listeners as well, you know, festive season, and be safe. And Zama, thank you very much. Have a lovely evening and a year further.
Thank you so much. And that is Zerlinda van der Merwe, who's the co-founder and director at TVDM Consultants. We're going to go for a quick break, and when we come back, it will be time for questions for the champions. We'll be back just after this. Welcome back to the Tuesday, I nearly said Friday edition. I think that's how much my brain is on December mode. It's the Tuesday edition of the Private Property Podcast, and I'm your host, Zama Kumalo. Well, it's that time of the evening where we get to do our daily competition, because we're giving away this money every day. And that is, of course, questions for the champions. And if you want to stand a chance of walking away with 1,500 rands, all you have to do is get 4 of your friends and family, create a unique name for yourself, make sure that you hop onto the live, let us know that your team are here and are present, and then, of course, listen attentively and wait until this part of the conversation where we get to ask 5 questions, and the team that answers the 5 questions correctly walks away with 1,500 rands. It's that simple to walk away with money right here during the festive season on certainly across our social media platforms, because there are different competitions that we're running on our other platforms as well. So we want to make sure that you're staying in tune, making sure that you're following us across our social media platforms. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure that you also hop on Facebook, like our Facebook page, also follow us on our Twitter page. And talking of social media, you can also follow me on @zamantungwa_K. Well, I'm ready for this evening's questions. Remember, they are based on last night's show. So you have to watch every show. You actually can't skip a show. You have to watch it so that you're able to answer the questions. We've kept the questions very simple because we know it's the festive season. We've had a really long and tough year. So we also don't want to drag it and make you think too hard about them. And the first question, or the first statement rather, for this evening, again, it's statements, true or false. And the statement is a property portfolio is a collection of portfolio investments owned by an individual or a group or a company. True or false? Going to repeat that, true or false? A property portfolio is a collection of portfolio investments owned by an individual, a group, or a company. True or false? Remember, when you answer the question, make sure that you use the hashtag and the name of your team so that we're able to track which team has answered correctly. That's very important because we don't want to, see the correct answer but not know which team you are a part of. Now, the second statement, again, true or false, Property Pick is a platform for people who want to invest in property. True or false? Remember, yesterday I was speaking to Leroy Slava, who's one of the co-founders of Property Pick. So Property Pick is a platform for people who want to invest in property. True or false? And the third one, true or false, never ask a seller why they are selling their property. True or false, never ask a seller whether they are selling their property. And the fourth one, having an investment property strategy makes it easier to choose the type of investment property you want to buy. True or false? I'm going to repeat that. Having an investment property strategy makes it easier to choose the type of investment property to buy. True or false? And the last one for this evening, fair market value is the agreed upon price between a willing and informed buyer and seller under usual and ordinary circumstances. True or false? True or false? Fair market value is the agreed upon price between a willing and informed buyer and seller under usual and ordinary circumstances. True or false? Well, that's it, folks. Those are the 5 statements. Very easy, true or false. Fastest fingers. First, do make sure that you share your team's name as you answer the questions. We also have shared them down here below. So if you've missed them as I was reading them out, we have shared them down here below. All the best to you at home as well as your teams. I do hope that you'll walk away with that 1,500 Rand cash prize. We're giving away the big money next week. So you do want to make sure that you keep playing because that one is certainly going to be interesting. That's going to be, of course, next week, and I'll be telling you more about it as we progress, because we want you to get the gist of it and get it right as much as possible. Well, that's it for me, Zama and the rest of the Private Property Podcast team. It has been a pleasure to be with you this evening. Until tomorrow, hoping you're staying home and staying safe.
Hi, I'm Merwe. I'm an entrepreneur from Durban. The suburbs of Berea and Morningside are built on a natural ridge that overlooks the home of the Sharks, the Moses Mabhida Stadium, Durban Country Club. It's just got an incredible outlook elevated over the city. Living in Morningside makes so much sense to us because everything is so central. Anything that we choose to do is a couple of kilometers away or a couple of 100 meters away. Restaurants, coffee shops, it's all here on our doorstep. You know, we've got great schools here. The girls' schools just close by are Moristella and Durban Girls College, and then fantastic boys' schools, Durban Preparatory High School, DPHS, one of the top primary schools in the country, and then Clifton, which now goes all the way to high school. It's so convenient to be in this area where everything is close by. Some of our closest friends stay just across the Umgani River in Durban North. Durban North is very family orientated with some great schools, some excellent restaurants, and some small commercial centres. The promenade along Durban's beachfront, also known as the Golden Mile, got an incredible facelift for the 2010 World Cup and today is used by all of Durban's population. We as a family love the Durban beachfront. If we're not in the water, you'll find us on our bicycles along the promenade. Being a world paddleboard champion, I've travelled to some of the most amazing beaches around the world, but nothing comes close to what we have here in Durban. Durban has great weather and great conditions all year round for surfing and for training and just being in the ocean. And that's why it's known as the warmest place to be. We've lived here our whole lives, and there's no place we'd rather be, and this is our neighbourhood.